In my opinion, there's no way, shape, or form anyone can watch the show and think that what the show is trying to say is, oh yeah, women lie about these accusations all the time. Absolutely not. It's more so saying, look at all these sticky, complicated moving parts that result in someone like Lucy thinking this is an okay thing to do. Look at how warped and mutilated her survival instincts are after being with Steven, and how Lucy now has a higher ability to lie and manipulate in order to do what she feels is the greater good. It's incredibly fascinating character, right? I'm really proud of the show for being able to explore this murky sort of stuff. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Full spoiler talk today for season 2, episode 7 of Tell Me Lies. Now, this is very comfortably the best episode of Tell Me Lies we've had so far. Every single character had a juicy, exciting moment this episode. There was so many interesting things going on, so many interesting character dynamics to get into. This really pushed the show forward, and this show was already moving at an excellent pace. But yeah, my God, what an episode. So let's just get into it. So the episode opens with a dream sequence from Steven. We rarely get these in this show, and this one's really fascinating. This is picking up where the last episode left off, right? Lucy got in Steven's head and said basically that, like, hey, I am the only one that sees you for who you really are and accepts you for who you really are. And the dream is obviously informed by that. It is a manifestation of that because she is the only one that he has opened up to about what happened with Macy. Really good opening to this episode. Next, we have this conversation that Lucy is having about Steven and Leo, where she basically says that, like, oh, with Leo, he always saw the best in me, whereas with Steven, I could be like my worst self around him and I knew he'd be okay with that. They also tie this into their physical intimacy in this conversation, which I find really interesting given the fact that in previous episodes, Lucy was talking and having conversations with Leo about angry sex. Now, I really like this scene because it's planting the seeds that Lucy is eventually going to get back with Steven, showing that she's starting to miss him and that toxic cycle that they were in. But I think it's really interesting because I feel like she is being uncharitable towards Leo here. I feel like this line from Lucy is really telling, where she talks about the fact that, like, oh, with Steven, I could tell him what I wanted, whereas with Leo, I kind of felt bad telling him what I wanted. I didn't want to interrupt and tell him. And I feel like that's a really uncharitable take. I feel like Leo, of all people, would have been really good if she told him what she wanted. And to me, it feels like she's just kind of like picking reasons out of a hat to justify going back to Steven rather than sticking with Leo or pursuing Leo again. Next, we're back to Steven being the absolute worst. There is this great scene where Diana is opening up to Steven and says, I need to take time off after failing the LSAT. And Steven's response is basically to go, but what about me? What am I going to do? Hilarious. Good stuff, Steven.
I fucked up with the LSAT because I'm burnt out.
Okay, and what do I do?
And then in a moment of peak Steven self-awareness, he says to Diana, what in your life is so stressful that you can't focus on uni and yourself and your personal progression? And it's like, obviously you, Steven.
What in your life is so stressful that you're falling apart like this?
Sorry.
I find this moment interesting because Steven is obviously a smart, intelligent character. He is cunning, he is manipulative, he is narcissistic, right? Like, there is a streak of intelligence to him. And I feel like he's being intentionally vague. He's almost testing the waters to see if she'll actually admit that he is the thing throwing her off. I don't think he's actually aloof. I don't think he's stupid. I think he knows that he is the thing throwing her off. And he just wants to see whether Diana will verbally confirm that to him and will actually, you know, confront the issue head on. And the fact that she doesn't shows that he is still in control. That's what this scene read like to me. Next, we have Steven reflecting on this conversation with, I believe, either Evan or Wrigley, and he tells them that Diana is in a hole that she's not even trying to get herself out of. This moment is such a good display of how he looks at his love interest with just such little empathy and human understanding, and he can't help but have resentment and disdain towards them when they don't do what he would do in their situation. But then he reveals his true hand when he goes on this tangent talking about the fact that it bugs him because he feels like if he was in rock bottom, he would get himself out of it out of fear for the fact that if he stayed at rock bottom, Diana would leave him. So basically saying this idea of like, oh, well, I would never let myself be in the dumps because I would be too scared of losing her. Now, this comment works in a few interesting ways. First off, weirdly, Steven is suggesting that he is more kind and merciful than Diana. Diana would show less grace, mercy, and understanding than he is, which is interesting given the lack of empathy he just showed in the sentence prior.
She's in a hole she's not even trying to pull herself out of. I know that shouldn't change how I feel about her. I should have unconditional whatever,
but also, and more interestingly and more telling of Steven, he's actually kind of looking down on Diana for putting him through this, right? Like he's saying, I would have enough respect for Diana to get myself out of this situation and not even let it get to this point, whereas Diana's willing to stay in the dumps and I have to deal with her being down in the dumps. It's really interesting and says so much about Steven and how he operates in relationships. Next, we have a small moment, but an important moment. Lucy apologizes to Katie about the parakeet story debacle. This is really good seeds planted for later in the episode when we get to that thing I predicted in the last video. So next we have this moment where Oliver eyes Lucy up and down in a really creepy moment. And I think what this is saying is that even if he is cheating on his wife with someone, he will still be looking for someone else. He is constantly on the prowl. He is not a good guy at all. We know this from the jump, but also it kind of informs that scene we had a couple of episodes ago where the barmaid was, giving Oliver a greasy, and it basically suggests that this is not his first rodeo. He does this fairly often and he is prepared to kind of dispose of women once he's kind of sick of them. Next, we have this Oliver and Brie hook up in the laundry. Now, this scene was a lot. I thought for a second, given how long it went and how long it held, I thought this might be the scene that Megan Oppenheimer was talking about being the really controversial scene of the episode. And I was a bit disappointed because I thought, oh, maybe my prediction isn't coming true. But no, this is a separate high stakes scene. So they're clapping cheeks in the laundry and Brie starts really freaking out seeing all the wife's laundry around her and basically gets Oliver to hurry up and, get the job done for him. And I think it's a really interesting moment. She has a pretty intense breakdown afterwards, rightfully so, and starts to freak out about what they're doing and what their current situation is and goes to call off their affair. And Oliver responds to this by dropping the L-bomb. Literally love bombing her, saying, I love you. Brie says, I love you back. And then in the most painful moment for Brie of this season so far, when he goes to leave, she calls out and says, I love you again. And he kind of just looks at her and closes the door on her and then goes back to his wife. I think the big moment you're meant to focus on here that basically sealed his fate in regards to Brie planting the earrings is the fact that he didn't say, I love you back the second time after Brie said it. I think Brie, it clicked in her head like, oh, he only said that shit to shut me up and he won't even say it, less than a minute later. I'll show him. I do not think it was the fact that he had to go back to his wife. He's doing that all the time. I think she knows the game, but it's the fact that he clearly used that I love you as a manipulation, I think sent her over the edge. I really like this sequence. I really thought this was effective. Next, we have Pippa and Wrigley reconnecting sexually. I really like this scene. I thought this hookup was just an excellently well-crafted scene. I think a lot of young couples could probably take notes. This feels like a really good example of an intimate scene that feels like it's also trying to be informative of what good intimacy between healthy partners looks like. I think this scene was really well handled, really intimate and beautiful to watch, and says so much about both these characters. I like that afterwards when Pippa has this big powerful moment for herself, Wrigley is sitting there and clearly has, his romantic feelings growing and intensifying, and there's this sense of tragedy after, achieving this thing together that they were both wanting to do, right? There's this sense of tragedy in this scene afterwards because that they don't end up together. Wrigley's alone in the future timeline in 2015 and Pippa is with Diana. It feels like almost in a way Wrigley is helping her discover part of herself and then to almost let her go. It's a really interesting and tragic moment, and I really like where this episode goes with Wrigley and Pippa. Given how beautiful this scene is, it feels like this beauty is very short-lived. Next, Lucy cracks it at Brie and basically screams at Brie saying that Oliver is just fucking her, but they are never going to be in love. This is a really good scene from Lucy. I think Lucy has been really nasty for a substantial chunk of this season. Say what you will about her and Steven. Obviously, she is the victim for the most part in that dynamic, like 99% of the time. However, I think towards her friends and other people, she can be a pretty terrible person herself. However, I do think Lucy came off really good here. Yes, she was harsh. yes, she was stern, but I think she was really hammering home an important thing for Brie to hear. And maybe this isn't the person Brie wants to hear it from, but yeah, I really could get behind what Lucy was saying in this scene. And I think Lucy's journey this episode is really fascinating. And I'm really curious as to what the fan base is going to make of her decision that comes later in this episode, which we will get to soon. Next, we find out that the case between Lydia's brother Chris and Katie, the sexual assault case that was going on, has been dropped. Chris has been found not guilty, and Katie is now seen as a liar amongst the university. This is a tragic outcome and a really interesting plot development. Next, Stephen is back to being just awful to Wrigley. Now, this was a substantial part of season 1, if you guys remember. Wrigley was really being bullied by Stephen after Stephen learned that Wrigley slept with Diana, and he basically picks this back up again. Stephen knows that Wrigley is starting to be happy with Pippa again, and I think all of these things combined, the fact that his relationship is down in the gutter and Wrigley's is showing some promise, I think he just wants to snuff it out again, and he basically starts pretending to care about the relationship between Wrigley and Wrigley's brother and starts saying, oh, imagine how your brother would feel if he knew you were sleeping with Pippa again, yada, 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 yada. Really cruel, really manipulative. I really like that Wrigley starts pushing back at Stephen here. I particularly like the line where he says, you know, sometimes I feel like you bottle things and say them in a way just to be a dick. And that's an important thing to note. I feel like the point Stephen made here is actually a good one. If it was coming from a place of concern, if he said maybe, oh, look, dude, I don't know if your brother would feel amazing about this, maybe let him know, that'd be one thing. But it feels like Stephen just really wants to twist and dig the knife into Wrigley. Really, this is all just because Stephen enjoys normally picking on the women in his life in terms of how controlling he is. And because he can't do that, he decides to start doing this towards Wrigley. I really like the ending to this scene too, where Wrigley says, how do you know Pippa definitely wrote it? And then Stephen responds saying, man, Pippa gets to work fast, doesn't she? All right, now next we have the plot line that I'm so proud I managed to predict in my last video. This is Lucy making a false essay accusation against Chris in order to try validate the real essay accusations. This is an incredibly interesting moment. There is so much to discuss here. Now, my only minor note for this episode, my only minor ding for this conversation is I love that it is between Pippa, Lucy, Molly, and Wrigley. This is another great example of 4 really well fleshed out characters. We all know where they stand. We all know why they are saying what they are saying. I just thought that other guy that was there that we've never met before, I think, sucked.
Saying what everyone thinks.
Well, Katie wasn't lying.
How could you possibly know that?
Okay. Chill out, dude.
Because this is not the first time that Chris has done something like this.
We did not need him there, and his writing just felt like kind of like paper thin character writing to just say the bullet points the writers needed to say to get to this inevitable conclusion where Lucy makes the false accusation. I just didn't love that extra guy there. It just felt really undercooked and really underwritten compared to our 4 core characters. And I think you could have cut him and just had it be between Molly, and Lucy, and Wrigley, and Pippa, and that would have been enough. But regardless, that minor nitpick out of the way, my God, what an effective scene. Now, Megan Oppenheimer, leading up to this episode, said that this is a writing choice that she thought might get her cancelled. And look, I don't think it's going to get her cancelled. I think it's really good, interesting writing. And I think every character's response to what Lucy does here kind of feels like the right messaging to have in the show. You know, she isn't championed for this. She isn't celebrated for this. And Lucy making this shitty decision, this poorly thought out lie, results in her being in such a low point that she ends up back with Stephen. But I really love that I do still get Lucy's intention here. I get what she was going for. She was trying to find a way to defend Pippa without outing Pippa for being a victim of Chris. You know, if Pippa isn't ready to come forward with her story, Lucy still wants to kind of like hold Chris accountable, and she just kind of fucked it in the moment, because you can see afterwards when she sees Pippa, Pippa is clearly upset because it's this sticky thing of Pippa wasn't ready to come forward and have that be a core part of who she is, be known as the person that was assaulted by Chris. But at the same time, She doesn't want Lucy walking around with her victimhood, you know, being a false victim, lying to everyone around her and carrying this story on her behalf. It is really a tough, prickly situation, you know, and it's not that I feel either person is fighting for victimhood status. I don't think that's how you're meant to take it. I think really what's going on here is if you've been through something as horrific as that and then someone else claims that they have, it's just entirely insulting. I think that's why Pippa is so unsettled. It's because Lucy's either going to walk around on campus and be seen as a hero or be seen as a victim and just have to lie and nod and pretend she knows what it's like, when really she couldn't even come close to knowing what it was like for Pippa. Or on the other hand, it's just going to invalidate victims like Pippa and backfire completely. People are going to figure it out. People are going to sniff it out. And it's going to make people that have really been through this stuff look like lying psychos rather than what they really are, which is victims of shitty behavior from people like Chris. It's really good writing. It's really morally icky, murky stuff, and I'm really proud of the show for exploring it. This show consistently does not give us easy answers. It is constantly asking us to question our moral allegiances, and this is just a fine example of that. It is so fascinating. And to push back on Megan Oppenheimer and her fear of being cancelled slightly, I think most audiences are smart enough to know that what it's doing here is critiquing Lucy and her choice here. It's wanting us to understand why she made this decision, why she thought it was momentarily a right thing to do, but why this sort of behavior has massive bad ramifications for an otherwise good social justice cause. In my opinion, there's no way, shape or form anyone can watch the show and think that what the show is trying to say is, oh yeah, women lie about these accusations all the time. Absolutely not. It's more so saying, look at all these sticky, complicated moving parts that result in someone like Lucy thinking this is an okay thing to do. Look at how warped and mutilated her survival instincts are after being with Steven, and how Lucy now has a higher ability to lie and manipulate in order to do what she feels is the greater good. It's incredibly fascinating character writing. I'm really proud of the show for being able to explore this murky sort of stuff. From there, Wrigley makes a poor time joke about Pippa liking girls, and Pippa absolutely destroys Wrigley. Now, there are two scenes with Wrigley that are probably going to make a lot of people cry. This is the first one. The second one is his breakdown the morning after. I found this scene more effective for me. Just watching his face absolutely break, realizing how badly he fucked up here is just harrowing. And the following scene the next morning is equal parts just tragic and sad and a really powerful moment. The performance here from Wrigley's actor is excellent, but yeah, a really tough breakdown to watch. And I think this show is typically interested in the sensitive emotions of its female characters, and rightfully so. I do not want to start feeling empathy for Steven, but I think it was really refreshing to see a character like Wrigley be this vulnerable and also show that all these things stack up on him as well. It was a really effective moment. I really liked it. Next, we have another great unhinged Steven moment. This is when he walks into the apartment. Diana goes, wow, you could have at least called to tell me that you're still alive. And he just goes, I'm alive. Steven proceeds to get really mean and weird and cold to Diana. And then he goes, are you scared of me? And he basically starts interrogating Diana and saying, if I was the person that everyone else says I am, if I was as bad as everyone else says I am, would you still love me? And she's just in straight denial here. She's like, well, you're not. So we don't even need to worry about it. She can't give him the answer that Lucy can give him, like she gave at the end of the last episode. You know, Diana keeps going, well, you're not that person, so I don't even need to worry. Steven picks up on this. He leaves Diana. He runs over to Lucy, and basically they confirm to each other. Lucy included confirms to Steven and vice versa. They say to each other, hey, we accept the worst parts of each other. We are okay and love the worst parts of each other. Let's get back together. An absolutely insane ending. And I really like this ending because really the only reason Lucy is willing to get back with Steven is because she just got dropped by Leo, and now she's being told off by pretty much every woman in her life, left, right, and center, for the false accusation she made against Chris, and she is at an all-time low. It's almost as if a curse, you know, the universe intervened and told Steven, yo, she's at an all-time low. Her self-esteem is in the absolute gutter. If you go over now, you'll probably get back together. So he scurries over and they're back together. The end of an absolutely excellent episode. I love that the episode ends on this acknowledgement from both of them that it goes both ways. The idea that they are both willing to get down in the mud and spit toxicity to each other. Just an excellent episode. And while we're here, I just want to talk about something from last week's episode. I've seen a lot of people say that Diana deserved to be slapped. Now, there is a massive difference between Diana deserved to be slapped or had it coming, and you get why Lucy slapped Diana. I get why Lucy slapped Diana. I get why she was annoyed. I get why it baited her. But no, Diana did not deserve to be slapped. Hear me out. All right? Diana is a victim of Stephen, just like Lucy is. In fact, at that point in time, Diana was more of a victim of Stephen. She is in the relationship with him. He is constantly gaslighting her and lying her and throwing her off, as explored in the latest episode. And in my opinion, most criticisms you can throw at Diana, you also can throw at Lucy, all right? They are both victims of Stephen, but they also perpetuate some of his worst traits to other people. Let me give you a gender-swapped example, right? Let's say Lucy was talking to Leo the way Diana was talking to Lucy in that scene, right? Let's say Lucy was just sitting there and saying awful shit after awful shit after awful shit to Leo. In fact, we don't even need to imagine she was doing that last episode. And then Leo slapped her. We would not be sitting there going, oh, well, you know, Lucy was saying some mean shit. Lucy had it coming. Absolutely not. All right. So no, we cannot sit here and go, Diana deserved that. Diana had it coming. All right. Because if Diana slapped Lucy, we would be pretty against her. All right. I do not think Diana deserves that. I don't think any of the women in Stephen's lives deserve what has happened to them or is happening to them. And I think the interesting thing is that it feels like some of the fan base looks at Stephen and Diana as like a united team against Lucy. You know, they are oppositional forces to Lucy rather than Stephen being oppositional forces to both Lucy and Diana. Does that make sense? You know, it feels like people watch the show and go, oh no, it's the evil couple, Stephen and Diana, coming for Lucy, when really it's just Stephen being mean to fucking both of them. He's playing both of them like a fiddle constantly. He's bouncing between both of them constantly, and they are both worse off for it. And I just feel like, you know what, like, Diana didn't deserve to be slapped, and Lucy doesn't deserve to be verbally berated by Diana, but you don't know what shit Stephen is feeding Diana constantly, the same way he was doing that to Lucy, which resulted in Lucy making out with Stephen in front of Diana in season 1, which was also like a fucking war cry. They're all being awful people to each other, and I'm just surprised that everyone was like, yeah, fuck Diana. Personally, I don't know. You can disagree in the comments below. And it's not to say that I think Lucy is just as bad as Stephen. It's not to say that I think Lucy deserves her treatment from Stephen. And I'm not saying I even agree with what Diana said. I don't. I am saying I understand Stephen well enough to know that most likely he's been in her ear and has just been saying like, oh, Lucy would do this, 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 this. And Diana believes him the same way Lucy used to believe all of Stephen's shit. You know, what about poor Macy? Like, Lucy has given Stephen the benefit of the doubt when she really shouldn't. So anyways, that's my thoughts on that situation. But I cannot wait for the rest of the season. This was just like an unbelievable episode. Like a genuinely like life-changing episode of TV. It was so good. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day and stay tuned for more Tell Me Lies discussions.